Last year, as I was considering what my next book would be, I wondered if it was time to actually write down my parents' immigration story and their pursuit of the American dream. And I went about it by asking myself, well, what is it that I want to write? Do I want to write a fiction novel based on their story? Or do I want to write a memoir, which would be sort of my recollections of them and the stories that I heard? So what I'd like to talk to you about today is how to do that, how to write a story based on true events or based on your life story.
You have a story to tell, but you don't know where to start. Let me show you how to free your story. I teach you how to write and how to dig deep in your soul to release your story and make a difference in the world.
Welcome to the Amante channel. I'm glad you're here. I am a fiction author and also here on Fridays to give you some writing tips and writing advice. And today I'm just kind of casually hanging out here with my dogs. And I thought I would talk to you today about writing a novel based on true events. How do you do that? And why would you do that, right? So what I want to do is I want to share kind of the thoughts that I had when I had this bright idea that I wanted to turn my next novel not so much into women's fiction or a romance, which has been my brand so far. It has been what I've written. And this novel would be something completely different. It would be more general fiction. There would be some historical events. There would be a lot of actual events that happen because it is based on my parents' life and the things that actually happened to them. And I had to ask myself a lot of questions, mainly why? Why do I want to write the story? Why now? And would anybody be interested in it? Would anybody care? And again, should I write it as a memoir or should I actually write a novel? So the first question that I asked was, why? Why do I want to do this? And I decided that a few things. First, I think it would be a pivotal novel in my career. I think that I've done what I wanted to do with my women's fiction and romance. Not that I won't ever go back to it, but I wrote the stories that I wanted to write, and it was time, and it is time to do something different. And so that was one why for me personally, just as my career move or what I wanted to do. But it has to be more than that, right? It cannot just be because this is what I want to do. Because just because I want to do it doesn't mean that readers want to read it. So that had to be the other question is, would readers want to read it? What would they gain from reading this book? And I decided that it would be a very interesting story, that that readers would get a lot by following this character's journey. It would be entertaining, interesting, and it would touch people's hearts. So basically, I think it would have mass appeal. Okay, so that was my thinking. So once I answered the why questions, what I had to do next was decide, again, is it going to be a novel or should I write this as a memoir? And I will let you know why I chose a novel at the end of this video, because ultimately this video is not about me and my novel, it's about you and what you should choose and what you should do. Okay, so let's talk about first why you might want to choose a memoir over a novel. Memoir writers really are interested in telling the true story, right? They want to tell the story as it happened. So you need to ask yourself, are you comfortable doing that? Are you comfortable writing about the events that happen in your life or in the life of those who are going to be in your book? How comfortable are you with that? How comfortable would they be with having you write about their story? Because it's their story too. It's mostly your story because it's from your perspective, it's from your memory, from your point of view. But of course, other people are part of your story, right? So how comfortable are you sharing that story? And the other thing you want to think about is the readers. So when we're writing a memoir, we have certain readers in mind. So are we writing a memoir for close, for relatives. You want to write, so there are, you know, people that want to write their life story or things that happen mostly for their family. They want to pass on the history to their children, grandchildren, and future generations. So that could be, you know, your reading audience. So you might be saying, well, yes, I want to write my memoir, but I want to write it for just a select group. I want to write it for my family. I want to write it for friends. Or are you looking at it as a larger memoir that can, again, touch a mass audience, a lot of different people? So you can write both types of memoirs. So if you're writing a memoir for a larger group, a larger audience that maybe has gone through similar things that you have gone through, then you have to think of creating, right, a story that is going to reach those people. It's going to reach that audience. And sometimes the reason that you might want to write a memoir, again, that's going to reach a lot of people, is because maybe by historical or social events that are happening in that story would be interesting to a larger group. So people that have gone through like tragic events or historical events that they want a larger audience to understand what you went through and what happened there, then that might be interesting, right, to a lot of people. And so then you might choose that audience. But you want to, again, decide how comfortable you are, how much of it, you know, do you really want to write about events that really happened, or do you want to fictionalize an event and write a novel based on those stories? So why might you want to do that? Well, if you answered the first few questions saying, I do want to talk about things that really happened, but I don't feel comfortable actually writing a memoir that people will assume rightly that it happened, right? This is the events that happened, or I don't feel comfortable with family members reading my memoir and seeing themselves in this story the way I see them. So if you felt like I'm really not comfortable with that, then maybe what you really want to do is you want to write a novel based on those events. The beauty of writing a novel is that you can take events that happened and you can fictionalize them. So they don't actually have to work out the way they worked out in real life. You could be inspired by those events, but you could change them. You can also create other events that didn't happen, because of course it's a novel, and the goal of a novel is to entertain the audience. And the goal of a novel is also to, you know, take the character through a transformation, take the character from point A to point, you know, Z at the end by going through all these different plotting events, all these different events throughout this character's life that leads to that ultimate end, right? And so you can create events that make for good storytelling, where with a memoir, of course, you're not going to do that. You're not, it is very story-like, of course, because that makes a memoir more interesting, but you are stuck with the events that really happened. You cannot add things and take things away that are not part of what actually happened, because the whole point of the memoir is people assume that it is real, that it really happened. You can story tell it, because nobody's memory is 100%, right? We are telling the story of how we remember it, or how we saw it, or the feelings that we had, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you know, that they're accurate, because our memories are faulty. But we want to make sure that if you're writing a memoir, that it really is the way you remember it as much as you can, right? You're not creating anything different. Where with a novel, you're creating, you're really just making up a story, and you can take real events that happened and add them in there, but it's a novel, right? It's not real. And so the last thing I think to consider on whether you want to choose a memoir or a novel is, like, what kind of writer are you? Like, do you enjoy creating and, you know, just creating a story, being creative and creating scenes and plotting and doing all of that? Or are you more, you know, do you have more of a journalistic style where you really want to get the stories down? You want to get what really happened down. You want to report really what happened rather than create a story. So what kind of writer are you? Because that matters. So what I want to talk to you about is how do you do that? How do you take those fictionalized events and create a story, create a novel? So this is what I had to do. So I said I was going to tell you why I chose a novel at the end, but let me tell you, my process of how I actually went about it. So I was really lucky. And I had some letters from my grandfather to my father and back, because my grandfather not only saved the letters that my dad wrote him, but he also saved copies of the letters that he wrote to my father. So I had this conversation going back and forth between my father and my grandfather. And for many, many years, I asked myself what I wanted to do with these letters. Do I want to copy them? Do I want to translate them because they were in Spanish into English, so that, and I still want to do this, or I just want to share them with my brother. So I want to, I want to save this history, but I really wasn't sure what to do. Should I bind it in some way so that I can preserve it? Who's really going to care, honestly, about these letters once I'm gone? I didn't really, wasn't really sure. So I've really done nothing with them. I've just left them there. And I read them years ago, and then recently I read them again, and that's when I decided that, you know what, I think I want to write this story. I want to write the story of my father's immigration to this country, my parents, right? My father and my mom. So I decided that I wanted to write the novel. So these are my tips on how I did it, what I did. So the first thing that you want to do is really just kind of jog your memory. So you want to make a list of all the events that you really remember. Okay, so we're going to start with what really happened, and you can do this as well if you're writing a memoir, right? So write down everything that or talk to relatives and get all the information down, so that the events that happened, and I would make a different list for historical events during that time period. So what was happening with your family, what was happening in society and the world, so that you have a picture of that time, of of that time period. Okay, the next thing is forget all those real events and create a plot, just like you would for any story. So you have this character, these characters, and you want to take them through a story. What's going to happen in the story? What is the character's goal? What are some of the conflicts that are going to happen in the story? What is the major conflict of the story? What is the theme of the story? So anything that you would do for an actual novel, right, that wasn't based on real things, but that was just a novel, what would you do? And you want to do the same thing. So if you plot, if you're a heavy plotter, if you outline, you want to do that. If you don't outline and you don't usually plot, then I suppose you can jump right into writing the story based on your memory and based on the things that you want the story to be about. Because even if you don't plot, you still kind of have an idea of what your story is going to be like, right? You still have an idea of what you want to say, what's going to happen in the story. Otherwise, and especially since it's based on true events, you already have that in your mind. So even if you're not a heavy plotter, you still have that in your mind. So my recommendation is make those lists and then leave those lists alone and start actually plotting your story. What's going to happen in this book? After you do that, of course, now you're ready to write your story, right? So you have all the actual events and you have the plot. What I did after that is I figured out, okay, well, how many of these true events are going to fit into my story? Not everything that really happened is going to fit into my story. And not everything that really happened makes sense to my story. So I'm not going to include it. Okay. So you kind of plug those in. Like, this was an interesting thing that happened, and this I do want to have as part of my plot. This was another interesting event that I think I can fit in there. So you do that, and you also look at that historical side, or that the actual time period, and see what do you want to include from that, because you want to give your novel the flavor of the time. You want to give your novel the the settings and all of that. So decide what kind of what is going to fit into your novel. Now I think a lot of it will, because you are basing your story, your novel, on real events. That's why, this is the whole point of this video, is how do you fit those real events into a story. So I think a lot of the things that you wrote down are going to fit into your story, and you probably maybe already have added it to your plotting points as you looked at the rise and fall of this novel and what things are going to happen. But you get those things into now your larger plot, and now you're really ready to start writing. Some considerations when you're writing now and you're adding these actual events into your story is timing. So the cool thing about a novel is that you get to play with time. So one of the things that I did for my story is I combined events. So if there were a couple of things that happened that in real life happened, maybe one happened 1 year and then another thing happened 3 years later. It's a novel. I get to do whatever I want now. So I could actually have it happen in the same year if I want to, if it fits my novel and if it fits the storyline, right? So you get to play with time, you get to play with dates, you get to merge events if you want to do that. So you want to look at that, like how you want to look at the flow of your novel, and you want to look at the pacing of your novel. So you don't want to stick with real things if it doesn't fit your novel. Otherwise it can get kind of dull and boring, because true life and real life sometimes gets boring, right? There's a lot of time where really nothing significant happens, but you can't do that in a novel, right? Oh yeah, they just sat around having coffee, or they just sat around going to work every day. That's not exciting for a novel. So you want to compress time, stretch time out, whatever you need to do for the pacing of your novel. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is look at your setting. So wherever your story takes place, is it crucial that it takes place there? So, let's say that you are in California and, most of the real story took place there. Do you want to stick with California? Does it make sense to stick with California? Do you want it to take place somewhere else? Would it make more sense somewhere else? Would it make the story more interesting, mysterious, exciting, whatever, right? If you had a different setting. Now, I stuck with my setting. So half of my story takes place in New York, the other place where my parents immigrated, and then the other half of my story takes place in California, where they eventually moved. So to me, I wanted to stick with those two places because they mattered to the story. I thought they were significant. They both were characters in their own way. New York is it's an exciting place, and for an immigrant that first came to this country and landed in New York, it's an exciting place to be, and I wanted to keep that. Same with California, has a lot of interesting places and settings that I thought were important to the story. So I just stuck with reality. I stuck with what really happened, but you don't have to. You can definitely change the setting to something different. There were little settings within the novel that I fictionalized. So, if you don't, your character lived in a certain place and you want to say the character lives somewhere else, why not, right? So as long as it fits your story and it makes sense, you can change your setting. It's nice. You get to be very flexible with what really happened. Okay, the next part of the story as you're developing your story is characterization. So to me, this was the hardest part because I'm basing this on a true person. I'm basing this story on my father. Now, but I had to keep reminding myself that this character in my story is not my father. Okay, so yes, he has the characteristics, personality, a lot of things that he did were similar to things that my father did. However, in the end, when the novel, this is a character, it's not my dad. So I had to feel comfortable changing certain things about the character. The character has to react to events that are happening in the story. Now, and also another thing about real life versus a character is that in real life, sometimes people are random, like they do things just because they do them, and sometimes it makes no sense, and yet the character does it anyways, or the person does it anyways, right? We don't always make sense, and we don't always understand the things that we're doing. However, your character is different. Your character has to have a goal and a purpose. Your character has to react to things that are happening so that it makes sense. Your character can't just randomly do things like people do in real life. So your character has to be following a path. Your character has to react to events that you're writing in your plot. So that's going to change, right, what really happened, because your character has to act like the character. So just remember that, characters are complex. That, just like real people, they are complex, but they also have to follow their own pattern. Like they have to follow their personality. They have to do things based on how you created the character, not the way the real person would have reacted. Okay, so sometimes that's a little hard. Also, another thing about characters is that you don't have to include every character that actually was there in real life. So you can, just like you compress time, you can merge a couple of characters into one. You can, you can change characters. You obviously want to change characters' names. And actually, it's not a bad thing to merge characters, to change their sexes, to do all of this, because you don't, you do want it to be a novel, and you don't want people that were part of your family or whatever just to because the whole point was not to write a memoir, right? Because you don't want to upset people, so don't. So write your characters, make them characters. You don't have to make them the real people. You don't have to include everybody that was there. You can, just use the supporting cast that you need for your story. And then if you don't need it for your story, then don't use those characters. Don't have them in the story, or change them however you want. They can be children. If they were, you can change them however you want. I'm giving you permission. Okay, another thing to consider is whose point of view are you going to use in the story. In a memoir, a lot of times it's told from first person because it's your memoir and you're writing it from your point of view. With the novel, you can use first person if you choose, or you can also use third person. And you choose the point of view of the characters just like you would in any novel, right? So usually we use the point of view of the character that has the most to lose or gain in a scene, and then we use that character's point of view. You could use the same character's point of view throughout your novel, or you could change point of views because, of course, again, it's a novel. You can do whatever fits the novel best. So if you want to have multiple characters tell the story, you can do that. If you want to have one person tell the story, you can do that. Or you can use first person, third person. So again, you have so much more flexibility with a novel because you can, basically decide how you want to tell the story. And you want to enjoy the creative process. So, to me, the fun part about writing is the creativity of it all. So remember that even though you are basing your novel on real events, a real true story, this should serve almost as a backbone, right? It can give your story some structure. You can pull in real scenes from events, but then use your creativity, have fun with your novel, creating a story just like you would any other story. So have a fun time creating your story and being creative with it, rather than feeling confined by the real events that happen, because with a novel, of course, you don't have to do that. Now, sometimes we write novels based on like one major event, right? So let's say that there was like a family suicide, and that is what is that's what's sparking you to want to write the story, right? You're not writing a giant saga of everything that went on over time, but you're really focusing on this one event and you're writing the story about that. If you're doing that, you might have a lot more real events just because of the effect that it had on the family, or the actual event, right? But even then, you can feel free to change it, because again, you're writing a novel, so it doesn't have, if it's like too painful to actually go into the details of how it happened, you can just have it be a suicide. It doesn't have to have it doesn't have to be exact the way it happened, right? So because really what happens in those type of events, it's not how it happened, it's just that it happened and how it affected the people that were there. So you don't feel like, okay, I have to do it exactly the way it happened. You can, and that's okay too, because sometimes you do want to go through the way it really did happen. But just again, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. You can definitely change the events the way they happen, and make it work for your story and for you, both emotionally and mentally as well. So the reason I chose a novel instead of a memoir is, first of all, I felt that the novel would let me tell my dad's story better than a memoir, because the memoir would be my story and the way I remembered him. And I wanted to actually tell the story through his point of view. I wanted to tell, how he saw life here in the United States. And I didn't want it to be my interpretation of how he saw it. Ultimately, of course it is. I'm the one writing the story, but I wanted it to be this character's point of view. And also, I had to be honest, my strength isn't writing novels. I'm not a memoir writer. I've never written a memoir, and I may or may not someday, but I'm a novel writer and that's my strength. And so I decided that, I want to go with my strength. This is what I've written in the past, whether it's, romance, women's fiction. I've written novels before and I know how to do that. So that's why I chose a novel versus a memoir. It wasn't anything to do with like not actually being offending people or anything, because really there wasn't anything that I thought people would be offended by, or that I had to consider other people's feelings. I thought, I'm just telling, I could tell this as a memoir and it would be just fine. But for me, it was just more of an artistic thing. I wanted to write a novel because that's what I do. So that's why I chose novel. So I hope that this helps you just to kind of think of events. I was just recently talking to a friend about writing down some of her stories and actually getting a book out. And I thought, what, this is a topic that maybe a lot of people think about. A lot of people want to write down their life story, their memoirs, and they really don't know how to go about it or what's the best way. So why don't I talk about that? So that's why I decided to do this video, and I hope that it has helped you if you've been considering writing a novel based on true events. So if it has helped, then please hit the like and the share button and hit the subscribe button if you're not yet subscribed. Come back next Friday and visit me again, and we'll talk about something else. See you then.